The concept of something living inside us, unknown, is an idea that typically frightens people to their cores. The usual suspect is something like a parasite, a microscopic organism feeding on your cells and nutrients, robbing your body of what you need to fuel itself, all while benefiting from your absolute detriment. Given enough time, these can have severe consequences on your meat suit's functionality and could ultimately lead to your end as the parasite continues on and continues the cycle. In nature, animals are hardwired to react to things such as parasites because of the impact that they have on our survivability. But what do you do with a parasite that can not only think, but can section your mind out of your body while it takes control? If you said start a Matrix-style fight in the middle of a Seattle police department, then you are correct. In Seattle, where it always rains, one could be forgiven for thinking it's New York with the bug monsters or something. A woman named Madison and her husband Adam from Supernatural, I mean, I guess his name is Derek, but it's really the only thing I've seen this dude in, inadvertently awakens something in Madison because Derek is a complete loser, but then swears he's a nice guy who finished his last. After doing so, it results in a revenge quest that would make the Punisher proud as people in key positions begin dropping. So in today's episode, we will talk about what this creature is, why it's not even really a creature, and also talk about just how absolutely stupid, I mean, complete nonsense this thing is. Like, bro, what is even going on with the electricity, and why is this thing like superhuman? It doesn't make a lot of sense, but I'm going to attempt to make it work. But first, this episode is sponsored by Left to Survive, the third-person cinematic zombie shooter available on mobile and PC. Using my link in the description or scanning the QR code and entering START22, you can get exclusive bonuses and rewards for the next 2 weeks. What is Left to Survive? It's a zombie shooter with an exciting storyline as you destroy hordes of undead, develop your base, and upgrade your characters, as well as competing with other survivors. My personal favorite aspect is the building of bases and developing camps to defend against zombies and opposing factions, which means as you build your base, you can engage in PvP between players, such as with tournaments, to obtain unique weapons and equipment to add to your arsenal, which in turn allows for raiding of higher level bases for more resources. And with over 50 million players worldwide playing on mobile devices and PC, a successful raid of an enemy faction is never too far away. You can install Left to Survive for free using my links in the description box under the video, or scan the QR code up on screen and use special promo code START22, and for my subscribers you can get exclusive 10 weapon keys, 25 XP boost, and 50 gold. Hurry up, as the rewards are only available for the next 2 weeks. Alright, let's get back to it. Alright, so we all know the drill, but for anyone new here, up on screen will be a timestamp. If you want to bypass the summary of the movie, then head there. Although, it's going to be one of those that it's just, you gotta dunk on it. So, if I had to watch it, so do you. It's really the only catharsis that I actually get. For all others who want to join me on this face-recessed journey into the skull, let's get to why it must be really easy to get away with game-ending people in Seattle, because these detectives don't really seem up to par unless evidence literally falls through the roof and lands in the same room that they are currently in. So we start off our fun-filled journey of brain discovery with a CGI building on the west coast. Judging by the trees on the literal coast, I'm gonna say it's either Oregon or Washington, but considering where everyone just so happens to be later on, definitely gonna say Washington. It's 1993. Nah, man, I miss the 90s, or at least what I can remember of them. And here is Dr. Weaver. She's talking about how Gabriel is becoming more malicious and grumpy, and for some reason his superpowers, which make zero sense. She mentions how they won't be able to contain him, and again, why exactly? I mean, it's basically just a gross lump that she has, you know? But we'll kind of get to that. Also, whoever suggests this movie, why have you done this? Someone mentioned this the other day. This channel is becoming gaming and Roanoke's B-grade science breakdowns, so I really hate that you're correct. Moving on, the light flickers, which kicks off that there may actually be a problem arising. Security arrives to tell Dr. Weaver that Pizza Face has become aggressive. Somehow, Gabriel is drinking the electricity as the doctors are just getting wrecked. Security goes in and gets his arm broken, ouchies, and Dr. Weaver takes a shot with a dart, knocking the creature unconscious. Also, a lot of nurses aren't going home after that workday, it seems. Gabriel has been a bad guy, and as he communicates over the radio, he tells basically everybody in the room that he's gonna body them. Dr. Weaver mentions how it's time to cut out the cancer, which kicks off this Thanksgiving levels of intro music. It's actually unironically hilarious, and it's also just really long. And if you've never seen Thanksgiving, well, welcome to Thanksgiving Z-grade movie coverage of next year. Well, I guess this year. Moving on to present day, Madison comes home from a day of working at the hospital to her husband. She mentions how she's tired and needs to rest because, you know, she's pregnant, which upsets Derek as he was watching the game. It's like, man, just use those sticks the good Lord gave you to walk down the stairs and use the TV down there. Instead, he opts for a right proper domestic, like a complete tool, as Madison ends up hitting her head, and hitting her head pretty hard. He does the whole thing about blah, 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 I didn't mean it, blah, 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 I moan when I poop. You know, the usual stuff someone says like this, as she then locks him out of the room and takes a nap as she's bleeding from her literal skull. I think that would warrant a trip to the hospital, but hey, whichever. Later that night, Madison goes to sleep with a concussion, as one does, and Derek is sleeping on the couch. He hears a noise and awakens to find someone has turned on the blender. Walking in, he finds that no one is there, as then the fridge door opens. Also, why is it foggy in their house? The TV now turns on as he spots a woman sitting on the couch, and here's where it gets super just mega dumb. Like, the seat moves. It shows someone was sitting there, right? But he sees no one. So why is the seat undepressing? Like, okay, sure. You'll see why later. This scene is just a real head scratcher. Anyways, husband of the year gets grabbed as Madison wakes up. She heads downstairs and finds his head is twisted around like a chicken wing at dinner. Then this thing like ring girl crawls towards her as Madison nopes out, but she gets knocked unconscious as Seattle's finest finally arrives. No forced entry into the home, and Madison is at the hospital, which she should have gone for anyways, considering her head hit the wall pretty hard. Of course, husband of the year was guarding the stairs, so, you know, maybe she couldn't get out. Anyhow, Madison ended up losing the baby due to that, but it really wasn't that, it was something else. So 2 days later, she's pretty catatonic as she's super depressed. The detective now shows up to talk to her, but we get the princess from Family Planet instead, as Madison won't speak. 2 weeks later, Madison appears to be good to go and heads back to her creepy house where surely she remembers the thing in the house. I mean, I wouldn't stay there personally, but hey, everyone's got their own battles. Heading into this creepy house where it's always foggy and haunted at night, she notices the lights outside flickering. Looking out, she spots a figure walking towards the house, but then she can't see it. So now she decides to lock up her doors, which you should always do at night before showering. And then she spots that one door is open. I mean, clearly, dude, my first instinct would be, oh, it's already in the house, I need to get out of here. But then she takes off upstairs, which, okay, the house is creepy, but it's actually still a pretty nice house. I mean, this is Washington too. Like, wasn't she a nurse and the dude was looking for work? Dang. Anyhow, the next morning, she locks everything down. Madison is upstairs looking at the caved-in portion of the drywall as her sister climbs up like a true weirdo. We get some exposition on how Madison was going to leave him, but she got pregnant before she could leave. She wanted a biological connection because she never really had one, and then she tells her sister that she was actually adopted when she was 8, but she can't remember anything before that. Jumping over to Seattle, I wish I'd actually known this when I was there for PAX West back in 2019. There's actually an underground portion of Seattle that after a fire, they just sort of rebuilt it 1 story higher to stave off flooding, which is actually like a really cool idea. As the woman talks, the lights flicker, which is never a good sign, but after the tour, she goes to lock up for the evening and close the underground city, but she hears something back there and it makes a clatter. She yells into an abandoned city that they're closed, which no. I mean, you're gonna come to find out that the decisions that people make in this movie is like, what? But you wouldn't catch me doing what she's doing. That's just asking to be completely shreked by some sort of ghost or something. Anyway, she hears running at her, and as she wastes time trying to turn on the lights, only to look up and spot Pizza Face Extraordinaire. Waking up in what appears to be an industrial building, you're going to laugh when you actually figure out where this is, because this also, I hate saying it doesn't make any sense. There's a lot of things here that just doesn't jive with me. You know what I'm saying? Anyhow, Gabriel talks to her about calling Dr. Weaver as Gabriel tells her it's time to cut out the cancer. Dr. Weaver goes to her patient book and finds a reference to cutting out the cancer as she remembers it. Later that night, as Madison is doing laundry, the lights flicker, but she ignores it. She sees a woman run through her house as her head starts bleeding again. Heading into the laundry room, she looks to her left and spots a face there and then is stuck and can't move. We get to see the ring thing start throwing around Dr. Weaver as the entire place changes. So she gets thrown around a bit as she heads into the kitchen with Gabriel grabbing the trophy from Dr. Weaver's excellence in science as Gabriel then completely savages Dr. Weaver behind the island. So the cops show up to the house the next morning, which we get this one detective saying she fought to the end. Okay, first, how do you know that? And second, no, she didn't. She really just ran most of the time. And third, what evidence is there to support this? Moving back to the industrial area, we get some rips as well as Gabriel leveling up his blacksmithing for Daedric armor by creating bronze daggers. Madison confesses to her sister that she saw Dr. Weaver bit the dust, which I know you would want to tell your sister that, but that's a great way to get committed. We now move on to victim number 2, and what are the odds that all these people are still living in the same place like 20 years later? Amanda's talking on the phone about Dr. Weaver getting got as he turns around and spots his window open and literal footprints in the water leading towards the closet. Again, why would you not leave? Instead, he just walks in there like, oh, this is normal, not a problem at all. And then we spot Gabriel is in there with him, but luckily he moves like ridiculously quiet. How does he do this? Well, we actually don't know. The world, nobody knows. I don't know how he moves so quietly. Anyways, back at Madison's house, as she rolls over, she sees that she's actually laying next to this dude and is having a sleep paralysis dream as Gabriel then crawls over her and towards the man. Pulling out a dagger, Oh man, just straight up takes the guy out like super quick. I mean, the takeouts in this movie are just crazy fast, just completely on sight. So Madison now tells on herself that she's seeing visions of people getting got, which, okay, so good intentions, but that's a great way, like I said, to get arrested and committed on the spot. Like, what do they call it, 1013, at least in Georgia? So the cops decide to go along with these psychic visions. They canvass the apartment building as one door opens when she goes to knock. So they enter a home with force multipliers drawn, saying if there's anyone home, you need to let us know. Pretty sure that's a violation of constitutional rights. Maybe you should let them know that you're in their home. But they find the old man in the bed confirming Madison's visions, although odds are they would just arrest her on the spot, like I'm 39% certain. Like, she had information about a murder. So any cops in here, that would get you arrested, right? Anyways, let me know in the comments. Back at the station, Detective Moss nails it by saying they're putting a lookout for Sloth from the Goonies when Madison shows them the drawing, which is hilarious. Madison now heads into the bathroom of the police station where the lights begin flickering on and off, indicating spooky happenings. She checks her phone and receives a call from Gabriel calling her Emily. He just wants to talk and see how she's doing. He mentions how Madison is her fake name, and they go back and forth with Gabriel telling her that she knows him. She tells him to stop, but he says the party is pretty much just getting started. Madison and Sydney now head over to their mom's house. Madison mentions Gabriel to her adopted mother, as she just so happens to have some creepy home videos. Apparently when she was a kid, she had an imaginary friend who mega sucked. He would call her on the playphone and tell her to take out her adopted mother. You know, real Ranger McFriendly stuff. As Detective Shaw watches the doctor's laptop, he ends up finding evidence that A, the doctors were all connected, and B, Madison is connected too. Detective Shaw now rushes to the doctor's, or the last doctor's, home, and as he heads in, he catches Gabriel in the act of having just ended this dude in the bathtub. Madison is in there trying to warn the detective as Gabriel is Spider-Manning in the corner of the room. Detective Shaw now begins giving chase to Gabriel, which, I mean, good on him, but no thanks at a certain point. He ends up chasing him all the way to underground Seattle as he reverse crab walks into a wall and then heads into the unexplored infrastructure of the area, finally before ending up in some sort of carriage area that's somehow also mega foggy, like someone was actively going a little crazy with the fog machine back there. But Gabriel starts throwing carriages at the detective before getting into a hand-to-hand and then running up and escaping through the roof. The detectives visit Madison and tell her that her name was Emily and she needs to go to a hypnotist to unlock some older memories. And unlock them they do, like really easily, in fact, almost too easily, like surface level easy. So we get some memories of Gabriel telling Madison to cut the cake, but really it was just to fool her into getting the knife and trying to take out Sydney, which, you know, alerted the parents that something was strange about their adopted child. So Beverly touches Madison's forehead and she's back now. She now realizes Gabriel wanted to hurt Sydney when they were younger because Madison wouldn't need Gabriel anymore for some reason. I don't know. I don't really track on this either. She didn't seem like she really needed him in the first place. It really just like he was annoying her. If anything, she probably thought he was more of a nuisance. So panning over to Seattle, you're about to laugh. Okay, get ready. The woman trapped in the industrial area of some place, she's able to free herself and grab the knife. Getting to the floor, she takes a few steps and oh wow, look at that. She falls through the roof of Madison's house as Madison begins screaming. So I have several questions, but the most glaring one, how did she not hear that woman up there? But also, bruh, where is this fan on the side of the house? Based on where she fell, that industrial fan up there should be facing out in front of the house, I believe. But even if it's at the side of the house, it's there, you don't see it anywhere. It's just completely strange. You could say, like I said, it's around the house maybe it's in the back of the house, but why would you have that up there? Okay, that is a giant fan that is just open to the environment, right? And it rains a lot in Seattle. You are just begging for your ceiling to collapse in because of moisture. No. I refuse to believe this fan is up there. So now they question Madison at the station over this. The lights begin to flicker as Madison tells them that she's telling the truth and the lights explode. So now Detective Shaw gets a call from Gabriel as he taunts them and then dunks on Madison. The police now know that Madison is essentially innocent, supposedly, but decide to put her in general population anyhow. Sydney now heads over to the creepy hospital with the ocean view and parks like crazy close to a cliff. Heading into Creepy Manor, she decides to hit up the archives. I still don't know why one person taking out a few nurses caused this whole place to shut down. So anyways, as Madison is yelling about how she's not supposed to be in the holding cell, we get your standard group of people. Meanwhile, Sydney locates Madison's files pretty easily in the basement before hearing that the place is basically just straight up, like it's really haunted because stuff is moving in the back and it's never extrapolated on. Finding one of the tapes, she brings it back to her mom's house and we now meet Madison's mom, or Emily's mom. She was a youngin' when she wanted to get rid of her child, as apparently it was an abomination, but now she's in a coma in the hospital. Turns out the woman in the attic was Madison's birth mother all along, so there you go. How apropos that literally nobody moved anywhere else in their entire lives. I mean, even after the hospital was shut down, wouldn't they find employment elsewhere? So now we get this whole thing about Madison was able to break this kid's arm named Bobby because Gabriel makes her strong. Dr. Weaver now wakes up Gabriel. We get the reveal like, ooh, spooky. There's my handsome little man. Dr. Weaver goes on to say that Gabriel's a parasitic twin, and usually one is underdeveloped, but in this instance, the twin is somewhat viable, but is still attached at the brain. Gabriel is feeding off of Emily. But here's what's dumb to me. These people are like perfect strangers in the holding cell. Why would they work together to mess with Madison? I mean, I get it, perceived weakness, but how many of them are like in there for just drinking or doing something stupid? This is jail, not prison. So it's not like they would even have time to like form gangs and stuff. On top of that, I mean, I've been to Seattle, so I wouldn't doubt it, but are there just roving bands of female gangs out there? Probably. You know what? I think I answered my own question. But we get some more info on Gabriel. He's able to access the occipital lobe and make Madison see what he wants her to see. Big if true. So we get the final piece of the puzzle. What they had to do to Gabriel to keep Madison alive or give her a normal life. Gabriel is able to trick Madison into making her see her regular life while he takes over. So they cut him apart and then pushed his pigman face back into her skull and took out as much as possible, effectively reducing him to just being a piece of her rather than like 1/4 of her. But when she hit the wall, it split open her skull, which ended up, I guess, waking up Gabriel. So anyways, as Gabriel pulls back her hair, her skull breaks open again, and we see Mr. Gabes is coming out to play. He takes over and immediately starts reforming her body in a way that he can now move it before tearing everyone apart. Game plan: lay in the corner and play dead before you end up as actual dead. So now the cop does the smart thing and literally puts his arm into the cage and takes pot shots at Gabriel, which now means he is able to escape. And he also like everybody in there's already gone, right? And then him basically tagging this woman in the back with lead is not helping the situation. Just leave her in there. Like, she's not going to escape. Sydney calls the detective and tells him what's going on. So Evidence Lady is putting up some evidence in the back as Gabriel is officially free and taking out cops left, right, and center. She elects to hide, which is probably the smart thing, as Gabriel begins looking for his stuff. The detectives enter the station as we get to this. My God, what is this? I mean, Gabriel is fast, but you're telling me out of all the force multipliers there, out of all the lead flying around that room, not one hit her in a vital area. Huge bra moment. And we actually see it is Madison's body, as you know, which is creepy, but as Detective Shaw calls out, she ends up sort of like coming to realizing that she's not in control of her meat suit, but it's fleeting. So then she reverse crab walks out of there. I mean, Gabriel's aim is a little ridiculous, hitting both the detectives with the chair, but it was pretty cool. And as he escapes, I mean, he's basically got a count of like 30 cops. Would have probably been a good day to call in sick, but luckily both detectives have mega plot armor and are good to go. Meanwhile, back at the hospital, Sydney goes to talk to security, but as he talks to her, his pacemaker explodes, taking him out as here's Maddie. So Gabriel is a little upsetty over Madison choosing Sydney over him. I don't think it was really like a choice, but the mom talks to Gabriel as Detective Shaw comes in and pops Gabriel in the back, which was just Madison's abdomen. To which he then stabs the detective and flips the bed over onto Sydney, screaming, "Ree, she's not your sister." And I can never get that high pitched again, but he literally does ree about it. So this part is kind of funny when the first time I watched this. So Sydney starts dropping facts about how Gabriel would feed on the babies, and that's why Madison couldn't remain pregnant, and it was all to build himself back up somehow, which we'll get to, stem cells perhaps. So she's telling Madison to come back and that she needs to take control, and it does look like Madison's getting control. And then Gabriel just straight up domes Sydney. He then walks over to his mom and takes her out by suffocation, meaning the bad guy actually won. But wait, it was all a dream. So as it turns out, Madison did get control and trapped Gabriel in a dream he wanted to see. So as they share the same brain, Madison is able to retain control just before firing and then seal off Gabriel in her head. He vows to come back, and I mean, now that she's actively aware of him, I kind of doubt it. So Madison, now I mean, what? She's able to access his strength of Gabriel without him, I guess? She lifts the bed off Sydney to save the day while the mom cries quietly in the corner. So they hug it out now with Madison probably slowly bleeding out due to, you know, the bullet in her guts. And also, maybe somebody might want to check on that detective. But anyways, the electricity buzzes, meaning that, oh no, Gabriel is still there. So to kick this off, I think the classification of Gabriel is actually wrong. As we know, he's considered to be a parasitic twin, but the reality would suggest something is different than that, which would explain probably why he's so pissed. But to form an understanding of this, we must first learn what a parasitic twin is. These things actually exist in real life, however they are incredibly rare to the point that most doctors will go their entire career without ever having seen one themselves. And because of this, actions may be taken that would seem barbaric to the outside observer in terms of treatment of this parasitic twin, but the cure is in fact better than the disease. The parasitic twin, as the name implies, is a twin who formed alongside alongside the dominant twin, but now has been fused into the dominant twin and feeds off their nutrients. During the course of gestation, after the two had already split and were on their way to form identical twins, or the two eggs were fertilized in the case of fraternal twins, something would happen that would cause one of the twins to cease their formation. Strange thing is, we aren't 100% sure how this works exactly. There are a few ideas, like some sort of vascularity issue within the mother or nutritional issues of developing two fetuses, but these are all hypothetical solutions to the question. Ultimately, however, one twin will be straight up absorbed by either the other twin, typically early on, but now there have been cases where fully formed legs, genitalia, arms, etc. have grown out of the other twin, but even with this, there is no movement or control from the dominant twin, indicating that while this area continued to grow, the parasitic twin is long gone. But that's the key here. When the parasitic twin is absorbed by the dominant, that's the end of them, or likely they already met their end, and that's why they're essentially being consumed by the mother's body, the placenta, or other twin. Where I believe the misdiagnosis comes from is the part right here. We see with Gabriel, he's very clearly functional to a degree, using his underdeveloped arms, conscious as much as Madison is, and capable. Maybe a little too capable as the movie shows, but capable nonetheless. This would completely change the diagnosis of the two, resulting in a new classification, or at least new when applied to them. They're simply conjoined twins, which would imply that Dr. Weaver, who received an Excellence in Surgery or Science Award, whatever the crap that was, is actually a friggin' butcher. Can you imagine just cutting off one of the conjoined twins and being like, well, the other one gets to live. Sorry about you, dude. Like, that's just completely crappy. So now there's no denying Gabriel is, not the easiest thing to look at in the world, and this would clearly forever and always change the way Madison's life would progress, having her bro hang out on her back and top of her head. But the issue is the fully formed consciousness. This designation means that when both were forming in the womb, they never split into two fetuses and then Gabriel was reabsorbed. Instead, much like with conjoined twins, a zygote would fail to separate after 13 days. When this happened, the body would remain physically joined. We know with some conjoined twins, and specifically with Gabriel and Madison, or Emily if you want to call her that, they can join ventrally, laterally, and dorsally, with these two split specifically dorsally. The terms to explain their fusion would be rachipicus, or the vertebral fusion above the sacrum, and craniopicus, or the skull fusion. Essentially, as they went to part ways, their backs would remain joined together and would not progress past this point. Now, there's only so much room in a conjoined skull, unfortunately, so as their brains began to form, they would form together. But the issue would arise during this formation. It's no secret that Gabriel is the underformed twin. Because of this, it would use Madison's formation as more of a scaffolding for his own brain, which as a result would mean that Madison's brain would be set up with all the typical lobes and connections that one would expect, but would have an unfortunate link to Gabriel. So with all the standard lobes there, with the frontal lobe existing much like it should be normally due to proximity with the parietal regions, filling in as normal with the temporal joining them, there would however be an issue with the back of the skull and the tissue associated with it. This is likely where a few changes would begin happening, which would also explain Gabriel's mannerisms to a degree, or at least his abilities. Likely the skull of Madison and Gabriel, having been joined, would be marginally larger than a standard adult female, and likely larger still than a male's. Because of this, more room for brain matter would exist, which means Gabriel's brain likely was grown into a degree as well. And judging by the shape of Gabriel's forehead, we could assume again some brain formation, but more importantly, we can assume this based on his goals and planning. While seeming a little rough around the edges, this planning would require likely a frontal lobe due to higher cognitive thoughts such as problem solving, planning, organizing, and thinking. However, remember the scaffolding I was talking about earlier. This is what I believe is the intrinsic link together. With the frontal lobe intact and relatively functional, this means that Gabriel is aware that he's alive and a being. Because of this, he would be capable of conscious thought and understanding. He would, however, also require the use of Madison's neurons for sensory information and likely memories. But more importantly, he would need the usage of her occipital lobe. Both Madison and Gabriel would likely use the same occipital lobe to some degree. We can see that even though Gabriel's eyes appear a little underdeveloped, they do work as clearly he can see and hunt the general area for whoever he's trying to take down. His own optic nerve would likely have less distance to travel, and this may be why he's able to react quicker as there's less distance, although it would be negligible. But he uses Madison's brain and likely his own neurons, which have fused into this area to determine visual information, but this likely is how he would be able to also keep Madison contained when need be. We know from what the doctor has said that Gabriel was capable of placing Madison in a sort of stasis. In her mind, she was still going about her daily routine or sitting in a jail cell, when really she was actually just being stomped out. Gabriel would take over during times of extreme physical duress. When this would happen, Madison was placed in a sort of dreamlike state, but the question is how? Well, it appears to me this would not have been easy, and likely as a child it wasn't even possible. But let's be real here, it's likely not possible anyhow, but that's what this channel's for. The context clues given to us throughout the movie is that Gabriel was using the fetuses located within Madison in a way that would grow his own own body back. Now, obviously, this is ridiculous, potentially. We know in the fetuses there's a fair amount of stem cells, and that's maybe what they were going for. Which, let's go over that for a moment. A stem cell is essentially a cell that can become any cell that we may program it to be or place it near that it'll take on those traits. Because remember, all of our cells have the same DNA, barring mutations, and whether it be a skin cell, an endothelial cell, a neuron, an immune cell, a muscle cell, they're all the same cell. They have just differentiated. This differentiation allowed for multicellularism and for us to be as we are, because without it, we would simply just be a blob of cells. A stem cell is the precursor to differentiation. With certain genes switched on and others switched off, it can virtually become any cell within your body, which obviously makes it highly interesting, seeing as ailments within our bodies potentially attack specific cells that would be critical for our survival and could possibly take us out of the game. So let's say you take a stem cell and place it in the muscular system of the body with someone who has muscular dystrophy. Not only can it help with dystrophin, but it can help rebuild the area and convalesce it to the point that it effectively limits the progression of the disease. In other areas concerning injuries to the spine, by differentiating the stem cells actually into nervous system tissue, the damage to the spine could be effectively repaired, which in turn may allow someone to walk once more as the gap is bridged and signals can be sent to walk, along with sensory information can be sent back through the spine up to the brain. Stem cells are likely the future, but obviously the issue is, or at least the issue with the thinking is, that stem cells can only come from fetuses. The reality is adults have stem cells in their bodies that we can really access and utilize, but it's become something of a taboo as of late to experiment and test on this because of the place that people have been told stem cells come from. Likely we will get past this eventually, but for now, relating it to Gabriel, this is likely what he's doing with the unborn children within Madison. As the fetus grows, he would begin stealing stem cells from it to fuel his own growth. Eventually, this would put too much strain on the child, resulting in its end, but leaving Gabriel a little stronger than he was before. Now, clearly, where this would need to go is the actual neural capacity of Gabriel. Likely between the frontal lobe and Madison's occipital lobe, there would be a disconnect as the brain is totally separated from Madison's brain, or too largely separated, and there's very few connections apart from just the optic nerve that likely runs to this lobe. However, try as you might, you can't communicate with your occipital lobe, can you? I know, it's annoying, right? You have to just do it passively by looking around. But that's kind of what Gabriel would be experiencing when trying to interact with Madison's brain. So this would be the hurdle Gabriel would need to overcome if he was able to take control of Madison, and this is why it took so long. 20 years in fact, or a little over 20 years. As the stem cells were directed north, eventually a small connection would form between Gabriel's frontal lobe and likely the back of the parietal lobe, as well as Madison's occipital lobe. Once connected, Gabriel's thoughts would start trickling into the brain of Madison. Now it could be argued that this is how it always was, as when he would call Madison on the phone as a child or take control of her, but as her brain continued to grow, eventually Gabriel would lose this fleeting control over her until she started getting pregnant. Once getting pregnant, this was Gabriel's chance to exercise control once more, to grow his own meat suit within Madison and form stronger connections. But the next question is, how would this be possible? Once enough of a connection was established, Gabriel could influence directly how her brain was functioning by using his own brain to think. Because of the newly formed connections between the frontal lobe and the occipital, it's a little hard to imagine as none of our brains really work this way. But I believe conscious thought would have more of an impact on the actual visual interpretation due to the functionality changes in the occipital. By imagining a scene and keeping that in his mind, Gabriel could trip the connections in the occipital lobe, making Madison essentially hallucinate. Now, a few episodes ago, we talked about visual hallucinations and how the neurons actually need to be in a depressed state and not communicating as much for visual hallucinations to actually present. But with the Madison-Gabriel connection, I believe it may work a little different. So I want you to close your eyes and imagine a room. It could be any kind of room you want. In the far left corner is a red couch. To the right of it is a lamp, and there's a rug in front of it. Now, likely, you aren't in a room like this, but you essentially just created a mental space out of nothing due to your neurons firing. You didn't see it, but you imagined it. I would suggest this is how it's happening with Gabriel. You can even do the same thing by keeping your eyes open if you really wanted to. You are still taking in visual information readily, but you can still imagine a place despite it not existing within your reality. So I think we kind of all get it by now, but I believe at its core, this is how Gabriel influences what Madison sees. This is why occasionally when her eyes are open, she can kind of see what's going on, or sometimes Gabriel's vision actually trips her occipital lobe into interpreting what he's doing, which superimposes over the false reality that she's currently existing in. And this bleeds over and indicates that the connection between neurons has grown much more robust. So I'm going to actually do something here that I haven't done in a while and dedicate just this next part to dunking on this movie, because what in the sweet hell is this? Okay, so we know neurologically there's a connection here, but can someone explain what is going on with the electricity and how it's able to utilize radio waves? I mean, I'm going to explain it to you, but what? So we see it has an influence on the electricity wherever it goes, right? And I know a lot of people are coming here wanting me to explain that, and I mean, I'm going to take a crack at it, but I have to warn you, not only does it make zero sense. It's incredibly dumb. I think Gabriel must be like a supervillain. But we hear Madison say Gabriel makes her stronger, and when he does take over, he literally dislocates her arms in order to use them properly. Otherwise, the physical connection between the joints would stop him from achieving any sort of meaningful moves. But somehow, Gabriel appears to be able to control the electricity in the area, which I also believe may be related to the muscle strength that he contains. By having this higher affinity for electricity production, he could in theory increase the strength of muscular contractions, but not in a way that we would think. Normally, an electrical impulse is sent via motor neurons to contract muscles in a controlled and steady manner. Gabriel, the movements do seem a little more jerky and powerful, and this is, I believe, connected to the ability to influence electricity, which Madison is able to access in the interrogation room to blow out the lights. Let's start by saying, yes, this is stupid. Now that that's out of the way, this would require the formation of an entirely new organ in the body. Well, technically 2 new organs. And for that, we would have to probably borrow this idea from electric eels for inspiration on how this may be possible. We know that Gabriel is screwing around with neurons. I think I've probably driven that point into the ground. So what do neurons actually use to communicate? Well, neurotransmitters and electricity in its most basic form. A jump to a new form of cells known as electrocytes, which are derivatives of neurons, would be something needed for Gabriel to function the way he does. Electrocytes are disc-shaped electricity-producing cells where the inner periphery is negatively charged and a potential difference of just under about 100 millivolts relative to the deeper portions of the cell interior, which have more potassium ions making it positively charged. When a shock command is issued, low electrical resistance develops between one side of the cell and the interior until eventually this results in a shock being delivered that is sent from cell to cell to cell, which can deliver either a large shock in the hunter's organ, at least in eels, or a smaller one in the sacs organ concerning communication. With electric eels, this is how they navigate murky waters and communicate, sending out small little shocks to let others know to either stay away or that they are there. And when hunting, they let out one larger, more powerful shock to mobilize prey in the area so that they can be sucked in via the mouth and eaten. For any of this to make any sense whatsoever, Gabriel would need to develop these organs, which is not entirely impossible, just exceedingly unlikely since our genetic coding likely doesn't have any information on how to actually build the cell. Plus, even if it did, you're talking about Gabriel somehow unlocking this on a genetic level, which I'm afraid not. But then, there were actually a lot of stupid things in the movie that made me kind of scratch my head, which I will complain about in a second, but let's say for a moment that somehow Gabriel was able to obtain these organs or get them built from the stem cells from the fetuses, and likely still also had maybe a version of it when he was younger. This allowed him to contract the muscle with more force, making her stronger as a child, strong enough to throw adults around, break arms, and in general overpower humans. This would be the activation of the hunter's organ. But this is really not all that surprising. I've said it before that our bodies contain way more strength than we actually think they do. If every muscle in your body pulled in the same direction, you could lift around 25 tons, and that's in all of us. By contracting the muscle with more force, we could break bones, damage muscle, but in turn produce way more strength than what would seem normal for the frame of a person. That's why Gabriel's motions always seem jerky and in some cases seemingly faster, as he's not sending information for the muscle to contract so much as he's literally just electrocuting certain portions of it, causing it to contract more forcibly, and as a result make Madison stronger and faster than you would expect just by him taking over. And this may be why the police had trouble actually winging Gabriel in the police station. Not only is the optic nerve shorter, but he would also have access to this physical organ. And because after Gabriel is contained, remember, she still has access to these neurons that he had as well in the end that made her stronger, but she didn't have the jerky movements, meaning that likely she didn't have full access, and by locking Gabriel away, a portion of that organ would be lost as well, or a portion of both organs. The sacs organ, or the lower voltage organ, would likely be what's used to communicate. Just like with electric eels, who send out the low levels of voltage in the environment, this can be interpreted as communication. With the low level of voltage sent out, if you think that's odd for something to do in the air, I'd say just look at lightning, but an even better example would be a car battery, as it does push out a small electrical current through the air. If you didn't know, it's just pretty much negligible. If you released its voltage, it could potentially arc. Gabriel is able to communicate via electricity with the same method by putting out low voltage and affecting the microphones of radios and phones to communicate. When Madison became angry, she can't control it as much and ended up probably using the hunter's organ and then forced the electrocytes to fire, likely all at once, which blew out the lights behind her. This would have likely activated Gabriel's almonds, which is why he called shortly after, as also in his best interest, because if they release Madison, they release him too. Of course, after being put in the cell, this would mean that the plan would need to change and she would have to break break out in order for him to complete his work. But I did want to bring to your attention just two things that this movie had to offer. Now, don't get me wrong, it was a cool concept, just kind of stupid. First, the doctor literally cut off a conjoined twin and removed the body but left the brain and then just pushed the face into the skull. Why? I mean, I know brain surgery is likely a little difficult, but why did you leave the eyes and the face? Would it have really been that difficult to cut off? And the second, just absolute, why was this even added? Remember before Husband of the Year got to see what his back looked like firsthand? Why did the couch undepress itself like a ghost? I still don't get that. Unless Gabriel at this point was forcing Madison to see things and didn't want her to see herself. But if it was from that perspective, when Gabriel was sitting on the couch, she did see the back of her head. But then how did Derek not notice it when he flipped on the lights? This part bugged the crap out of me when I saw it in theaters because it clearly says that it's a ghost. But then it turns out to be your mutilated conjoined twin. Like, bro, what?